Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. Audra Charles no way intended to become the woman who cracked Genoa City wide open, but the moment she noticed the lowest inconsistency in Claire's precisely curated history, a quiet dubitation burned into a preoccupation that would eventually expose one of the most unbelievable identity twists the city has seen in decades, because Claire was no way who she claimed to be, not to Kyle, not to Nikki, not indeed to Victor, and Audra's grim pursuit of the verity would turn her from undervalued schemer into the mastermind of total chaos as she followed a trail of sealed relinquishment records, altered sanitarium lines, and hushed plutocrat payments that all led back to a night Genoa City history had still buried, a night connected to a dissolved child everyone believed had failed, a child whose actuality had been cancelled for the sake of power, character, and heritage, and when Audra eventually erected it together, the consummation hit her like a blast. Claire wasn't just hiding her history, she was the once, revived under a stolen name, raised in murk, and strategically placed back into Genoa City like a living time lemon staying to explode. The reveal detonates during what was supposed to be a routine gathering at the Newman Ranch, where Victor believes he's hosting yet another controlled power display, but Audra hijacks the moment with surgical perfection, calmly dropping the verity into the room like a lit match, publicizing that Claire is the long-misplaced son everyone mourned, the child whose death instrument was falsified, whose identity was altered by important hands hopeless to abolish a reproach that would have destroyed dynasties, and as Audra lays out the substantiation, DNA tests intimately cross-referenced, medical records that shouldn't live, and a hand only one person in Genoa City could have forged, the room falls into stupefied silence while Claire's face rainspouts of color, because for the first time, she knows the mask is gone and there's no escape left. Nikki is the first to reply, her knees nearly buckling as she realizes the girl she trusted, defended, and aided into her home is connected to the darkest chapter of her life, while Victor's jaw tightens not with confusion but with rage, because he recognizes the verity incontinently and understands exactly who orchestrated this deception times ago, and worse, why. And Kyle, caught in the crossfire, feels the ground collapse beneath him as every tender moment, every rumored pledge, every intimate concession with Claire now feels like part of a precisely finagled taradiddle, making him question whether he was ever loved at all or simply used as a pawn in a vengeance plot decades in the timber. As Audra continues, she makes it clear this was no accident and no coexistence, that Claire didn't just wander back into Genoa City searching for answers, she was guided there by someone who wanted to renew old injuries and strike alliances from the inside, and the counter-accusations are ruinous as fritters incontinently begin pointing toward Victor, toward Nikki, toward indeed Jack Abbott, because someone had the coffers to abolish a child, rewrite her history, and also strategically introduce her at precisely the moment Genoa City's power balance was formerly fragile, turning dubitation into a campfire that consumes every relationship in its path. Claire eventually breaks, her precisely composed surface shattering as she admits she's known the verity for times, that she was raised on fractions of falsehoods and half-trueness until she uncovered the rest herself, learning that she was no way supposed to live, that her very life was considered a liability by people who chose heritage over love, and while she insists she didn't come to Genoa City to destroy anyone, her words ring concave as Audra exposes dispatches, fiscal transfers, and meetings that prove Claire was still situating herself near the center of every major power player, bedding herself into Newman and Abbott circles with perfection that feels far too advised to be coexistence. Alliances deteriorate incontinently as Nikki accuses Victor of being part of the original cover-up. Victor fires back that Nikki made the choice that started it all. Jack demands to know how his family came contributory damage in a secret war he no way agreed to fight, and Kyle, emotionally wrecked, walks out unfit to indeed look at Claire, whose silent gashes do nothing to undo the sense of treason ripping through the room. Audra, meanwhile, stands firm, unapologetic, revealing she didn't do this for power or vengeance but because she refuses to be contributory damage herself presently, because she honored that Claire's presence was destabilizing Genoa City in ways no bone was willing to defy, and by forcing the verity into the open, she's rewritten the rules of engagement for everyone. Indeed, if it means painting a massive target on her own reverse. In the fate, Genoa City becomes a pressure cooker of paranoia as secrets formerly allowed buried begin clawing their way back to the face, with Sharon questioning whether the history she remembers is real, Phyllis smelling occasion in the wreckage and still aligning herself with Audra, and Victoria realizing that the identity reproach could destroy Newman Enterprises if shareholders learn how deeply the deception runs, forcing her to choose between guarding the company and exposing her own family's sins. Claire, now completely unmasked, becomes Genoa City's most dangerous riddle, not because of what she's done, but because of what she represents: evidence that the important can abolish lives, rewrite trueness, and still pretend to stand on moral high ground, and as she retreats into insulation, observers are left questioning whether she'll seek redemption, vengeance, or complete obliteration of the families who decided her fate before she ever had a choice. Audra's move sends shockwaves that won't fade anytime soon, because by pulling on one loose thread, she's unraveled an entire shade of falsehood stretching back decades, turning abettors into adversaries, suckers into non-natives, and pillars of Genoa City into worsening remains. And as the dust settles, one thing becomes sorrowfully clear: this wasn't just an identity reveal, it was a protestation of war, and nothing in Genoa City will ever be the same again. Audra Charles's earth-shattering reveal: Genoa City doesn't simply reel, it fractures, slivering into rival camps fueled by paranoia, guilt, and fear, because Claire's unmasked identity doesn't just expose a secret child long allowed dead, it forces every major power player to defy the horrifying verity that their conglomerates were erected on choices that cancelled a mortal life. And nowhere is the fallout more unpredictable than at Newman Enterprises, where Victor incontinently launches a ruthless constraint strategy, sealing lines, issuing veiled pitfalls, and summoning trusted abettors to ensure that the full compass of the reproach no way reaches the public. Yet indeed Victor Newman, master of control, senses this extremity is different, because Claire isn't just a liability, she's living evidence that indeed he formerly lost control, and that consummation gnaws at him as Nikki spirals into emotional collapse, visited by recollections she tried to bury, flashing back sanitarium corridors, rumored exchanges, and a moment of weakness that led to a decision she believed was unrecoverable, only to learn decades laterally that the child she mourned didn't die but was hidden down, raised without love, verity, or protection, and now stands at the center of a storm that threatens to destroy her marriage, her family, and her sense of tone. Meanwhile, Kyle Abbott becomes the unintentional face of treason as whispers ripple through society functions and boardrooms likewise, with people questioning how near he truly was to Claire, whether he knew further than he admitted, and whether the Abbotts themselves were manipulated as part of a long-con vengeance that may not be over, forcing Jack to step by and intimately defend his son while intimately demanding answers Kyle can't give, because Kyle himself is unraveling. Replaying every moment with Claire through a new lens, realizing that her gashes, her vulnerability, indeed her admissions may have been concentrated with purpose, and the consummation that he loved someone whose veritably actuality was a taradiddle pushes him dangerously near to tone destruction. Audra, for her part, becomes both idol and villain overnight, praised by some for exposing the verity while others label her a reckless opportunist who exploded a lemon without minding who was buried beneath the debris, and she feels the consequences incontinently as alliances she allowed were solid dematerialize, doors formerly open slam shut, and anonymous warnings begin appearing, subtle at first, also unmistakable, letting her know that important people don't forgive exposure. They avenge, yet Audra refuses to retreat, induced that Claire's story isn't finished and that someone differently is still pulling strings from the murk, because while Claire admitted to knowing her true identity, there are gaps in her story that don't add up, missing times, unexplained backing, and a network of protection that suggests she was acting alone. As dubitation spreads, Phyllis Summers sees occasion in the chaos, still feeding information to select journalists while playing both sides, brooding to Audra that the verity can be monetized and weaponized, while contemporaneously assuring Victor that she can help control the narrative, if the price is right, cementing her part as Genoa City's most dangerous wild card. Sharon, shaken to her core, begins questioning her own recollections of that long-ago night, seeing that her history may be more integrated with Claire's fate than anyone realized, and as she digs deeper, she uncovers unsettling concurrents that suggest she may have intentionally played a part in the cover-up, a consummation that threatens her fragile stability and sends her seeking answers that others are hopeless to keep retired. Claire herself becomes a ghost, retreating from public view as her formerly precisely constructed life defeats, but insulation only sharpens her resoluteness, because stripped of her false identity, she's eventually free to embrace the verity she was denied, and as she begins reconnecting with fractions of her history, she uncovers commodity chilling her exposure wasn't just about guarding reports, it was about silencing a trouble, a verity so damaging that important people were willing to abolish a child to keep it buried, and that verity still exists, hidden in sealed lines and suppressed testaments that could bring down entire dynasties if exposed. As Genoa City's elite scramble to cover themselves, the city becomes a chessboard of shifting commitment, with Victoria still maneuvering to isolate Newman Enterprises from the reproach while intimately preparing contingency plans that may involve immolating her father if necessary, Billy circling the chaos with reckless curiosity, seeing influence, and Nick caught between guarding his family and defying the moral reckoning they can no longer avoid. Audra's disquisition intensifies as she uncovers substantiation that Claire's return was touched off by someone differently sphere, someone who believed the history was about to resurface and decided to control the narrative by bringing Claire back under vigilant eyes, and the counter-accusations are stunning, suggesting that the real mastermind of this mess is still at large, watching as Genoa City gashes itself piecemeal, and when Audra eventually confronts Claire intimately, the pressure is electric as Claire admits she doesn't know who to trust presently, revealing that she was guided, manipulated, and defended by an anonymous donator who promised answers but demanded fidelity, and now that the verity is out, that donator has gone silent, leaving her exposed and hunted. The disclosure shifts everything, transubstantiating Claire from perceived architect into implicit victim, and Audra is forced to question whether unmasking her was the wind-up, or simply the opening move in a far more dangerous game. As legal pitfalls impend, sealed records are challenged, and processes begin circulating, Genoa City braces for a reckoning that will review power, heritage, and identity, because Claire's actuality proves that history in this city isn't written by verity, but by those ruthless enough to bury it, and as the walls near in, alliances shatter, and old sins demand payment, one verity becomes inarguable: Audra didn't just expose Claire, she exposed Genoa City itself, and the war burned. By that disclosure is only beginning. As the shockwaves from Claire's unmasking continue to ripple outward, Genoa City enters a phase far more unfaithful than open chaos, a cold, advised reckoning where everyone smiles in public while stropping shanks in private, because now that the verity exists, the real war is about who controls what happens coming, and Claire, formerly dismissed as a riddle woman with a questionable history, suddenly becomes the single most precious, and unpredictable, asset in city, a living key to secrets important families believed were buried ever. Victor Newman wastes no time raising from damage control to outright warfare, still assembling a legal and commercial strike force designed not simply to cover Newman Enterprises but to neutralize Claire herself, whether through silence, exile, or character assassination, because Victor understands commodity intimidating that many others do. If Claire ever gains full access to the verity about her exposure, she wouldn't just expose a reproach, she'll strike the moral authority of the Newman dynasty piece by piece. Nikki, meanwhile, is unraveling in slow stir, visited by fractions of memory that refuse to stay buried, flashes of a baby's cry, a nanny who avoided eye contact, and a hand she doesn't flash back signing but knows in her bones belongs to her, and as guilt consumes her, Nikki begins intimately meeting with Claire, drawn by an unsupportable need for forgiveness. Indeed, as she knows that one wrong word could crump everything Victor is desperately trying to contain. Claire, raw and stripped of pretense, listens in silence during these meetings, absorbing Nikki's guilt without offering remission, because for the first time in her life, she understands the full compass of what was stolen from her, not just a name, but choice, agency, and the right to define herself, and that consummation hardens commodity inside her, transubstantiating grief into purpose. Audra Charles senses the shift incontinently, fating that Claire is no longer an unresistant figure at the center of the storm but an awakening force able of turning the entire city upside down, and though Audra tells herself she exposed the verity to stop manipulation, she can't ignore the growing fear that she may have unleashed commodity she can't control, especially as pitfalls against her consolidate, raising from anonymous warnings to deliberate sabotage, fiscal freezes, and subtle attempts to insulate her professionally and socially, all bearing the unmistakable hand of Victor Newman's long reach. Kyle Abbott, still reeling from emotional desolation, becomes an unanticipated wild card as his heartache curdles into preoccupation, driven by the need to understand whether the woman he loved was ever real, and as he digs into Claire's history on his own, bypassing family influence and commercial firewalls, he stumbles onto commodity nipping substantiation that Claire was covered long before she arrived in Genoa City, tracked, guided, and steered by a shadow network designed to keep her close but controlled, suggesting that her return wasn't simply orchestrated, it was supervised, and the question of who was watching her becomes more dangerous than the verity of who she is. Phyllis Summers, seeing blood in the water, positions herself as both supporter and trouble to everyone involved, feeding picky information to journalists while brooding to Claire that she deserves vengeance, to Audra that she deserves credit, and to Victor that she deserves protection, consummately playing all sides while intimately establishing everything, because Phyllis understands that in Genoa City, the person who controls the narrative controls survival. Sharon's disquisition into her own buried recollections takes a disturbing turn when she uncovers evidence that she formerly intentionally handed evidence that helped legitimize the falsified death instrument, a disclosure that sends her twisting into tone blame and fear that she, too, could be held responsible, and as she confronts Nikki with this information, it becomes clear that the cover-up was far more wide than anyone admitted, involving croakers, attorneys, social workers, and commercial fixers whose fidelity was bought with fear or fortune. As legal pressure mounts and sealed records begin cracking under processes, Victoria Newman makes a brutal computation, still preparing a strategy that could cover the company by immolating individualities including her own father, if necessary, revealing that indeed within the Newman family, fidelity has limits when survival is on the line. Claire's elaboration reaches a critical point when she eventually uncovers the identity of her anonymous donator, not a single person, but an institute of interests formed times ago to manage threat, bury dishonors, and abolish inconvenient trueness, with her actuality supposed too dangerous to exclude but too unpredictable to admit, turning her life into a long-term constraint design rather than a tragedy, and the rage that disclosure ignites is stormy, because it means her suffering was no way an accident, it was policy. Rather of retreating, Claire makes her first decisive move, still reclaiming her original name through legal channels, indurating accounts tied to her custodianship, and initiating proceedings that could force public acknowledgement of the cover-up, all while maintaining a calm, nearly unsettling countenance that terrifies those watching her, because it becomes clear she's no longer replying, she's planning. Audra realizes too late that Claire doesn't intend to burn Genoa City down in a blaze of revenge, she intends to strike it methodically, forcing every important player to face consequences one by one, and when Claire warns Audra that exposure was only the morning, not the end, Audra understands that her part in this story may soon shift from agitator to collateral damage. As alliances buckle, secrets face, and moral lines blur beyond recognition, Genoa City becomes a battleground where verity is both armament and guard, and the question is no longer whether Claire will destroy lives, but whose lives will be destroyed first, because as the city braces for the coming disclosure, one nipping certainty settles in: Claire was no way meant to survive her history, and the fact that she did may be the most dangerous twist of all.